and welcome along to episode 10 of the Big Breakdown podcast. I hope you're safe and well. Today, we are bringing you our review show. So, we're just going to be talking about the previous 9 episodes, some of the key messages that we've got out of it, and how that relates back to the who, what, how. In case you missed it, in the last episode, we did our draw for our pairs of Canterbury boots. Congratulations to Pete, Tom, Tracy, and Sean. Your boots should be hopefully arriving soon, direct from Canterbury. So, well done to you. Harrison, last one of the season. You all right?
Yes, yeah, yeah. It's been an interesting ride. It's mad to think that what we're in May, that January came up with the idea of creating a podcast to help sport coaches out, and now we're already at the end of season one. It's crazy how quickly things have changed.
Yeah, definitely, and that even more so just on our ability to deliver it. I think if you actually listen back to the first episode and you go, "Oh, everything about it," but I'd like to think we've come on a little bit. We've got a few more listeners along the way, which is always nice to know. But I think the whole focus of obviously this season was around understanding your who, understanding your what, and understanding sort of how then to bring that to life. And I think with a mixture of the chats that we've had and the guests that we've managed to bring on, I think we've really been able to bring that to life.
Oh, oh, definitely. I think every guest that we have had on has they brought their own expertise, they brought their own stories, and they've shared some probably very valuable information for people to take away. And you know, yeah, some of it doesn't always work for everyone, but these are people that are coming on and sharing their stories. You and I have shared our stories. This is we're just trying to create that community of coaches so we can all learn from each other.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the common themes, and we'll try and go through all the different sections and what we've picked up from each of them, but every guest that we've had on has emphasized the importance of understanding your who and how understanding your participants and their wants and needs should be the main sort of foundations of the sessions that we deliver and the importance of that. Is there anything that stood out for you around that the guests have talked about that's been a key sort of critical feature?
Yeah, I think like you said, every guest has mentioned it. In some format, and you can go to more extreme examples of Steve McEwen when he's out in Zimbabwe, trying to coach a whole different culture, and actually how we can understand the culture and why those students are there, and how some of them are having to come over crocodile infested waters to just get to training, and how that affects their training. But or there's just the simple ones of holding a talent contest for your players to get to know each other, and actually understand each other that way. But I think regardless of what environment they're going into, it's clear and it's apparent that understanding who you are coaching has got to be the bedrock of every bit of good practice. Um, so that's kind of like the main thing that stood out for me.
Yeah, I think there was the common theme of like you say, we've said about it a lot all the way through what works for who in what circumstance and why in terms of how we deliver. But your participants are the sport is there. It's there to facilitate the activity, but you've really got to tailor it right to the people that are coming through the door because that's what's going to keep them coming back. And you've got to engage them with that. And it's just interesting learning about the different ways that people have done that. I mean, you look at something just the little bit that when we had Colin on and we talk about the university game, I think it's quite interesting when it comes to understanding your who because you've constantly got that 3-year transition of players
Yeah.
because every year there's more people coming in, which changes the dynamic because you've got different abilities and stuff like that. So understanding the participants and tailoring the program in that way that's going to allow them to one develop and two meet their wants and needs that to keep them in the program is important, and that's why they've managed to grow from sort of 90 odd members to what 270 I think at the last count, which is massive. So even in that respect, even when you're dealing with a big program, you've got to try and allocate for each one's wants and needs to keep them coming back.
Oh, yeah, but you're exactly right there. You're exactly right, and it's, you know, the participants are the bedrock. You cannot have a successful program, you cannot have a successful club if you don't have players there. And yeah, as we've said on multiple episodes, you know, their motivations might differ. So for a university student, why have they come to university to play rugby at a place like potentially like Leeds Beckett or any of the Bucks Super Rugby clubs? Well, they want to progress on up and try and play a good standard of rugby union. But then at your local club, the reason why they might be coming along is the social aspect. And you know, and we as coaches, we're we're driving the bus, and you know, these participants, these players, want to get on this bus and they want to come on this journey. Now, what are we going to do as the bus driver to ensure that first of all they're happy with that, and secondly, what keeps them coming back?
I'm enjoying the energy bus reference there, Harrison, from last week. Shows that you do listen to me from time to time. But you are. It's a good point, because you can be the best coach in the world, but if you're not creating an environment that's right for the players and the players don't come, then you're just left with yourself and a bag of rugby balls or footballs or something else. So, you know, you've really understanding your participants and making it about them and not about you, and putting the ego to one side, I think it needs to be emphasized more on even coaching awards, about the importance of how you get engage the participants. Because I know when I've delivered RFU stuff before, they talk about, you know, is the session active, purposeful, enjoyable, and safe, and stuff like that will keep people back. And it's right, the types of activity structure that we align that to will support with that, but how you are with people and how you're tailoring it, and if you really get to know them and what they want to get out of it and align the activity structure to that, they're going to feel more empowered to be there. They're going to come with more energy, and that environment alone will then get more people to come along, and that could be a tipping point to success, because success doesn't necessarily have to mean results on the field. Success can be having 40, 50 players at training session on a Tuesday, Thursday, because of the environment you create, and a byproduct of that will then be results on the field, because you can do more high quality training.
Oh yeah, yeah, spot on. That's you're absolutely spot on there, and you know, and it is a difficult balance. You know, I'm not going to say it's easy. I'm sure you're not going to say it's easy, especially when you're, you know, relatively new to coaching. You're always going to have, you know, your wants and expectations on one side, and then the players' wants and expectations. And actually, you know, as this, you know, as we discussed throughout the season, how can we align those two? And I think, you know, Andy Plymer in episode 5, you know, he had quite a good example of how he began to apply them together, with that culture idea of, right, well, you can't justify. I'm going to say something, but you can't rebuttal. Now that's, you know, that's something as simple as that just allows players' voices to then be heard. Their wants and needs that can then be heard, and us as coaches, then they're being held accountable as well. And it's a two-way relationship. You know, us as coaches, we've got to hold the players to account, but then the players have got every single right to hold us to account. You know, if we're saying these things, right, are we living and dying by our own sword? Well, if you're not, then are these players going to get on the Kris Energy bus?
Yeah. I, I think going back to that Andy episode as well, I think he sort of talks about that glass shattering moment of when he realised why are the players here, when he sort of said when he had that fallout with his player, and he said that this is not a democracy, and then he realised, and he looked around and he saw people's faces and how people were when they were walking away, and how he went, actually, I need to change here, something needs to change. And that sort of the impression from him there was around that then changed how he approached his delivery. It got more people involved. It became more about the environment, the culture. Was it Ray McLean? I think he quoted quite a lot within that episode as well, and the influence that has, and it does. And I mean, that is a lot. I think another element of it in terms of understanding the who, sort of in a different direction from that, is making sure that the content that you're delivering is relevant to their age stage and developing certain aspects. And that's what we spoke about way back in episode 2 with Christian, with around, you know, developing the fundamentals and how you can still be coaching them through the sport. It doesn't necessarily have to be just getting people to just do a load of squats and stuff in a line. You can still do rugby specific activity that's allowing them to develop their overall fundamental movements. That's then again going to have a positive outcome on them being able to execute more sport specific skills.
Yes, yeah, and actually a lot of these, especially those, you know, what I found and what I actually found quite interesting from Christian's episode is that, you know, that when you're doing, especially when you're dealing with younger ages, it's the main focus is going to be around that fundamental movement stuff, which can be applied to lots of different sports. You know, and we gave, you know, he gave examples of how it could look in the girls football team that he's currently working with at Blackburn, but then also some rugby examples. And actually, you know, we can that doesn't, some of that stuff doesn't have to apply to, some of it needs to be applied to just younger age groups, but actually can be applied to older age groups as well. Hearing that, you know, a game of tag with a bunch of adults, you know, hits those objectives. It hits those objectives of, you know, they're getting themselves warm, they're having fun, and that, you know, so therefore it is purposeful. It is purposeful and enjoyable. And for this and for that objective of that for the objectives of that part of the session was just to simply get themselves warm. Well, it's ticking those boxes. So who is it for us to judge from an outsider perspective when you see a bunch of grown men or women playing a game of TIG before they go and play their chosen sport?
100%. And I think fun is the key thing at the end of the day. And that kind of, I suppose, brings us on to the next bit around understanding the what and understanding your game and what you deliver. But you can go to great lengths to actually understand your participants, but if your session's still boring, that's not going to help them come back down still. It's got to have that purpose. It's got to be, you got to make the games fun that you're doing. And I mean, we'll come on to sort of what we touched on in episode 4 around the mental model stuff, I think, in a bit. But on that element of fun and understanding the what, I think Andy touched on that quite well in his episode again when he spoke about the stuff that he got from Richard Cheetham around creating the learning environments and the different games that he does and how he tries to engage his players that way. And I quite like the idea of the goal that he sets himself is that no session should look the same in terms of the content that he delivers. And I know that is probably something that I've been guilty of in the past, of sort of kind of running the same theme game, but changing and tweaking bits here and there, but it essentially is still the same game. You know, having that variety in each session, but still meeting your learning outcomes, does keep it fun, does keep it engaging, and keeps it fresh for the players, which again will get them to keep coming back.
Yeah, yeah, I think I agree and disagree with you on that statement. I don't think there's anything wrong with like playing very adaptive games. And I think from my experiences of coaching players, you know, sometimes they like that continuity of, right, we know what this game is, we know what the objectives here, but we've added different constraints based on different areas. I think what I liked from Andy and what he took from Richard Cheetham was, you know, the warm-up was completely different every time, and that was his task. So the first part of the session is something they've never experienced before. They know it's going to be something fun and enjoyable, which is going to be a little bit wacky, like running around, blowing up a balloon, and then first you to pop them all. That's an example of a bit of a wacky game. You know,
I think if you listen back to that episode of Andy with Richard, one of the key messages he speaks about in that is that the warm-up sets the tone for the rest of the session. So by creating it different, by engaging them in a different way than just, you know, running around and doing a bit of stretching and getting them active and engaged early, should then have a positive outcome on the main bulk of the session that you want to deliver.
Yeah, well, it's spot on. I think it's, yes, you know, I think there is times where you can go and do a normal warm-up where they're running around and just getting stretches on each cone around the pitch. But what kind of tone is that setting for your session? It's, is that the fun, engaging, right? We're getting ourselves warm, ready for us to learn. No, it's kind of, yeah, you go and do your own thing because we're not ready for you yet. But that's how, I know that some players have perceived those kind of warm ups. Well, actually, yes, I've planned this warm up, and it's going to really energize us and set a tone, and that sometimes might just be a bit of a high energy game, whatever game you want, ready for them to kick in straight into a bit of a high energy session.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And I think that comes back to, in order to sort of create them games, I think that comes back to what we spoke about in episode 4 about the understanding of your sport and that ability to then use them concepts to shape the curriculum type element that you want to then progress moving forward. So, we spoke about the key moments of the game and how they can help shape the decisions that players make. And we speak about a lot of this with the students here is, you need the game's really important to have that understanding, because that is what we're there to coach rugby. So we need to be coaching players the sport and then developing and fine tuning and tweaking the skills within that. So we need two different models. You've got your mental model, which is your belief and vision of how you see the game to be played, which we spoke about how you would then get the players involved with that. But then you've also then got your technical models for some of the key skills that you want to coach within that have got the key critical features that you want to try and identify that you will then coach and develop. So if you're looking at tackling, for example, you will have a a technical model of what that tackle would look like in pre, during, post contact, and it will be them critical features that you would look to identify within the session that you're trying to coach, and that will be the coaching points that you look back on. But that all stems back to actually understanding your sport and the key principles and processes as part of it.
Yes, yeah, and we touched on it. We touched on episode 1 about when we should start layering on tactical understanding points, and I think you and I are both in agreement that around that under 15, 16 age group is when it's probably a good time to start layering that on. And that's what as one of the things that we look to do here in Oxford is is we're dealing with 16, 17, 18-year-olds, and actually giving them, beginning to start to give them good, strong tactical understanding means that by the time that they're 18, they can almost walk into any environment and have that basic understanding of what different areas of different areas of the pitch might look like, what might be required from them, and it might be different in each environment depending on the tactics of the coaches. But if I've got that understanding of, right, I'm 5 meters out from my own try line, there's 10 seconds left on the clock, and we're attacking out, what do I need to be doing? That's a tactical scenario which you might be faced with. And I mean, it varies. It varies, but then our solutions might differ depending on which environment we're in.
And I think you've really touched on, because a key point there, Harrison, because we mentioned that in week 1, and I think there's this, when you start talking about tactics, people then assume that you're then sort of overly structuring people or players what to do where. When actually tactical understanding is that little bit different. It's making them aware of how the pitch massively influences and directs how we want to play the game. And yes, you might have a set of desirable outcomes that you want to see in each section of the field, but how we spoke about in that episode, and even in our case study in episode 9 about how to coach that, is you can still have that as a desired outcome, but allow the players to explore different solutions to that problem, so that when they get into the game, they're making decisions based on the movement patterns of the defenders, whether the risk reward is high to play. But they're aware that the objective within the blue, for example, which was our gain territory in our own sort of 22 to sort of between 10 and 22, was gain territory. We want to try and get the ball as far further up the field, because it takes the pressure off of potentially conceding a try. But players need to be aware of that. They need to know that yes, this is a high risk zone of where we could win or lose the game for when the result does start to matter the older you get. Because everyone hates losing, don't they, really? Deep down.
Yes.
Not about winning, but it is.
Well, I think people kid themselves.
It just feel that you do feel better after a win, but you're right. That too many people focus that when you start thinking about tactics, that is your focus. You're just drilling people down into right. You will do this here. You will do that there. But for me, that's not tactical understanding. That is over-structured rather than allowing the players to explore solutions on how the pitch can influence decisions that we make.
Yeah, and it's actually quite interesting because I remember over these, I think it was about a month ago, maybe 2 months ago, when the England head coach Eddie Jones went on to another podcast, I believe hosted by Jake Humphries, and he was talking about, he was talking about schools and private school rugby and how that's actually, a lot of ex-professional players go straight. Their first job is going to teach in private schools, and actually that's not very beneficial for the private school kids who are learning how to play the game, because they're thrown into a performance environment straight away. And especially when whether you played 100 times international rugby, that doesn't make you a good coach straight away. You might get rushed through your coaching measures straight away, but it doesn't make you a good coach straight away. It takes a lot of, understanding, it takes a lot of practice, it takes a lot of trial and error. And actually, I think what he found and what he said on there was actually quite profound in terms of they're creating performance environments for school kids when actually they're meant to be development environments. And actually, when you talk about tactics, they're being drilled into a certain way. And I think you and I have experiences firsthand with players that have come to university, that have come through a private school system, in which it's so ingrained that they have to play a certain way because of the way they played at their club. It's actually really hard to break down those shackles to actually help them progress in lots of different environments. And my role as being a development coach at Leeds Beckett wasn't, yes, we wanted to win. We wanted to win games, and we wanted to progress on up to be beneficial for the club. However, and it's similar to the role I've got now at the City of Oxford College, is these lads will leave our programme in 2 years here or 3 years at Leeds Beckett. And it's my role as their coach is to make them the best player they can be at that time. And that is having strong tactical understanding so they can go into these multiple environments, but and a good technical skill set. And if you can deliver those two in a development environment, you're onto that player then onto a gold mine, because they're coachable. And that's what I found it really difficult coaching, at Leeds Beckett, when you're dealing with these private school kids who are so ingrained to play a certain way.
Yeah, well, we've got them for 3 years, but they've had 5 years of being coached a particular way to a specific game plan that school potentially haven't changed for the entire time that members of staff have been there, for example. So it is interesting. I mean, we talk about, so you've picked up some good points there that very much aligns to some of the stuff that we spoke about with Stuart and Joe. So we've got two different academy setups there, from the Yorkshire Rugby Academy and the Wasps Academy around, but each of them have their star at Yorkshire Rugby Academy and Wasp at Wasps Academy. Makes it easier to remember. But each of them, Star was skillful, tactically aware, athletic potential and resilience, and Wasps was warrior, application, skill set and physical potential. So there's some...
In episode 7, I have to say, I think they're making me say this for legal reasons. Joe Kane did technically get it wrong. It's not work rate, as he said twice in that episode. It is warrior. He has received a slap across the wrist, and I have been told that if it does get brought up on the podcast again, I do have to correct that. So
I did say it correct, in all fairness. It is warrior.
But like legal reasons, I think I just have to cover that. But yeah, as you were saying, Chris.
But within that, within Star, tactically aware is within there as a behaviour that players need to be present, and with Wasps on its application. It's how are you applying it within a game? I'm interpreting, and please correct me if I'm wrong there, that you within application, you would expect to see some form of tactical awareness within that in terms of how they play the game. But I think there's one thing that the common theme within there is they are sort of looking for the similar things, although they're both branded differently.
Yes, oh yeah, definitely. I think when you're working, especially within youth talent identification, there's there's only so many things that you can go looking for, and there's only so many different acronyms or initialisms that you could create that actually make sense. So WAS are quite lucky with their with their WAS acronym, and then the same with star model. So,
but what I really liked, especially what Stuart touched on, and I think this could be used more. It'll be a lot difficult now that there's a lot less community staff from the RFU floating around now, but that they give the CRCs then, community rugby coaches, the star cards. If they saw players that they thought were should come and be looked at by the academy, because they were going into schools and handing cards out that this is your sort of star card, you get a pass to come to the academy, sort of because they're showing some of these potential. I think that's in creating more opportunities for players to get noticed, but which again aligns to the fact that Yorkshire is especially it's a big old county with just Stuart and Alex sort of running the show now, so they need the sort of the boots on the ground to help them identify some players, to stop them from getting lost in the system. But in order for that star card model to be successful, the coaches within all these other clubs need to be aware of the game, the tactical awareness, what that looks like, to be able to identify these players moving forward. Because we touched on it with Stuart around, if you're nominating a player for DPP, for example, what support has that coach had in identifying the players to be putting forward? And I don't think there's really enough out there to support coaches with that process.
No, but I think it is really difficult to go out there and support coaches with that, because even I'm now experiencing it, experiencing myself in terms of talent identification and trying to look at players. It's actually sometimes you're not looking at the player in front of you now. You're trying to look at that player in front of you in 2-3 years, and how that would actually, and how he or she would be, how they look in 2 or 3 years, and do they fit into that game of what you see the game will be in 2 or 3 years, which goes back to something that Steve McEwen mentioned. We can judge these players now, and if they're good enough, and if they are sheer quality at their age, you probably bring them to a system. But then there's also those players which you go, like, he's got great tactical understanding, he's got good physical potential, but his technical ability on his catch pass isn't quite strong enough there. But we're still going to bring him in anyway, because we know that that's a coachable skill that I can work with him on. You put him into an elite or a more elite environment that they're currently in. That's gonna boost their ability. So in 2-3 years' time, they could, all three of them, their physical potential, their tactical understanding, and their technical ability have all improved. So therefore, that player, can reach no heights.
Yeah, but from a skill development point of view as well, if coaches are provided with more details and support to create, like Steve, I think Steve touched a really good point in his episode, like you just said there, and we need to be coaching what the game looks like in 10 years. So it goes back to that curriculum type idea of, well, actually, how can coaches be now supported more meaningfully in terms of guiding players towards predicting what the game's going to look like, giving them the skills to be able to react to that. I'm trying to think what how to phrase sort of what I want to say, but around we talked about curriculum with Steve, and we talked about it with John. We loosely touched on it with Stuart as well. But where does the guy that's coaching the under-9s, if the chances are that's going to be a parent that might not necessarily have played, but have taken their kids down to the rugby club because of the other elements of the game that rugby brings around that teamwork, respect, discipline, sportsmanship, etc. So they might not know necessarily about the game. How are they going to get that support, that development of, well, actually, how's the game going to develop in 10 years to support these players to get to that point, if that makes sense?
Yeah.
Which I suppose we're trying to help and develop with. But I suppose at the moment, I don't think there's enough resources to support coaches to get to that point.
No, but then it's a difficult skill to do. It's a really difficult skill to do is to be looking ahead and thinking about how potentially the game might be changing, what new laws might be coming in.
But I think that's where we want to try and hopefully, if you've been listening, it's trying to change that focus now. Is it comes through the quality of the planning that you do, and if you're going to plan out your whole season as a curriculum, I think you touched on something around afterwards when we'd actually stop recording around this idea of curriculum versus like a syllabus type thing. I think it's probably worth talking about now before I carry on.
Yeah, no, so I mean, I think a lot of there's potentially a lot of newer research surfacing now around what curriculum is versus what a syllabus is. I think we've referred to a curriculum as as how we what kind of stuff we can be coaching our players and how we can be implementing that. But then I think we and myself, you and I have both sat here now and discussed around curriculum probably a little bit wider than that as well. It's the culture that we've embedded within our club, within our playing group. So are we sharing a positive culture of good behaviours, especially with younger groups? Are they able to show good respect, good sportsmanship, everything that the RFU after you want to promote, and that really is embodied within your curriculum. So an example I know that these rhinos use, that if they see one of the players in front might drop a bit of rubbish, that the next person is the one picking up and throwing it away. Now that's embedded within their curriculum, because that's what they want. That's the level of respect that they want the players wanted to have for their environment. When actually syllabus is probably more on the ground. What are we actually coaching our players to do on the pitch? And that can be done we've discussed that in episode 9. That can be done on the field in terms of actually developing working with coaching sessions. They'll do this, and we'll play games, gamification, superpowers, everything you want on the pitch, but then it could be done off the pitch in terms of a video review or a reflective practice. And that's pretty much more syllabus based. This is how we want to play. This is how we're going to get them there. But then curriculum is encompassing of the wider picture. Does that make sense?
It does, and I suppose that's sort of what I'm trying to say is, like, now if I was coaching at the lower age groups, is that I'd have a detailed, you'd have your season plan of the key elements you want to coach within that, and that would be linked back to the game. And then if you can start fine tuning these skills, the players should be then in a better position to react to the changes that the games make further down the line, because we're just coaching them the game. In terms of, this is the objective of the game. The objective of the game isn't going to really change. It's going to be the rules that change and how we then adapt and react to that. Because I think that's something that gets lost, is coaching the game. We tend to coach some important skills within it, but you can coach skills within the game.
Oh, exactly. And you're right. And this goes back to episode 4 when we talk about the mental model. Right. The pre-lusory, the goal of the sport is never going to change. It's always going to be outscore the opposition to win. But like you've touched on, it's the rules that change that. So a mental model is always going to have to be shifting a little bit depending on the new variation of rules. And you look at a paper that you and I both read by Sergio about serial winning coaches. It says within there that those best coaches are able to predict the law changes for the next 2-3 years, because they can prepare their players earlier. And if you can prepare, the earlier you prepare your players for the future, the more they're going to get a foot up when it comes to actually performing in those environments.
definitely. Definitely. And I think that sort of then brings us on to that discussion around the how and what that then looks like in reality, sort of on the field. I mean, is there anything that sort of touched from that? Because we spoke a lot about in the last episode around how we use games, and we mentioned that in episode 4 and in episode 1 as well. And Sharpie touched on that with just this idea of playground games to get sort of people engaged. Is there anything that stood out to you in the last few episodes, particularly about the how?
Um, I think the massive one that stood out for me is once again it's the variation we've heard from each coach, is that it's not one shoe fits all. It's not right. We're all just going to play. We're all just going to throw a ball in or throw something in and go off and play, because that's some players will learn, and they'll learn at different rates. There's nothing wrong with, I think, picking up. There's nothing wrong with doing a bit of drill based practice if we're incorporating that in and out of games. I think, yeah, it's the variation of practice, and it goes back to it's linking the first 2 points, which massively stood out, linking who and the what, and that then brings into your how. If you've got players that that prefer learning through games-based practice and constraint-based practice, that's the way forward. But then, you and I know, having coached at level 9 Yorkshire 3 rugby with some of the older players, they love an Auckland grid, and if that's what gets them down to training and gets them practicing with an Auckland grid, that's what it goes back for good old phrase: what works for who, in what circumstance, and why.
Yeah, definitely. But even Steve's comparison with a different sport, because he spoke a lot about his volleyball as well, and how he then views the game, where he moves around from in terms of his positioning, to that sort of linking about how we actually coach and what we're seeing on the field is, we need to try and see the game from different lenses while we're coaching, in order to be able to align that back to what we understand about the sport and what we've established within our mental model, to then be able to give the feedback or get feedback from the players to get these different views of stuff. Because again, if you just stand in one spot all the time, you're not going to be able to see everything. Therefore, are you actually coaching? I think that's when we get sort of sucked into this idea of fun facilitation than actually being an active coach.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, anyone. I don't know how I should say this, but anyone can be a fun facilitator. Anyone can. You can get any Tom, Dick, and Harry to come off the pavement, walking past, and say, "Can you facilitate this bit of fun here?" Whereas actually, coaching's got to provide a bit of meaning to it, and actually, as from my own personal experiences, as I've developed as a coach, the planning and actually reflecting on what I do as a coach, of how I coach, is massive in terms of how I implement, or how I want to get across my syllabus and curriculum. Because if I don't, I can sit there blindly going, "Well, this worked for me back when I played." Well, that's the game has evolved. The generation has evolved. You're dealing with a different generation of player that has has different views on not just rugby but the whole world. So, reflecting on your own practice is really key. And and I think Joe Kane summarised that with his when he told us that story of him planning for a game, thinking that I'm going to go and play this team, but we're going to play and train a certain way to try and beat this team. And actually, he fell flat on his arse because the other team had worked it out better than he had, and changed their game plan, and won quite comfortably by the end of it, if I remember correctly. But he was then able to reflect on that within that on that game and on that session, and that's actually probably, and he said that's massively changed how he sees coaching now.
Definitely. I mean, I think it's not well, coaching is reflection is a massive part of the whole who, what, how framework that we were trying to that we've sort of developed on, that we've learned from sort of being on the masters and sort of teaching on undergrad here. But the key principle within the middle of that is being able to plan, deliver, and then actually review. Because if you're not reviewing your session and then your session plan, but then also reviewing how you've aligned that to your participants' wants and needs, your understanding of the sport, and then the activity, you're not developing as a coach.
No, and that's and you've got to hold yourself accountable for that. So, I've got into the good habit now, and I know that you have as well, of planning our sessions. And the first thing you should always think of when you're planning a session is starting with the end in mind. So at the end of this session, this is what I want to see from my players. Right. This is where I currently think they are. Within the session, these are the steps, these are the exercises, these are the games, these are the constraints that I'm going to apply to this training session. And then you've got to sit back afterwards and go, right, did we hit those objectives? And if so, why? What was successful? And actually, I believe writing down what was successful, because that's more profound. That means that, for example, that session, it worked because I did X, Y, and Z. But then also, if it didn't work, why didn't it work? It worked because I didn't feel the players were engaged. They didn't enjoy the process. So they're just examples in which that you can sit down and reflect. And actually, if you're working with another coach, not being afraid to ask them as well. What do most coaches do after a session? They go into the clubhouse, have a beer, and sit there with the other coaches. And that's a perfect opportunity to say, right, what did you think of that session?
And I think that's one thing that me, you, and Steve, we weren't afraid to challenge each other at times either. And some of them discussions did get quite heated at times. They did, but we all trusted each other to do a job, and we're all comfortable enough to be able to share our ideas with each other and stick by them. And me personally, I'm definitely guilty of it myself, as being a stubborn person, that your way is right, when actually no, it's not. When you actually get told something, then you go away and reflect on it, and you go, no, actually they were right there. That's and that takes a lot as well, because that it shows that you're reflecting the right way. Because I guarantee that if you come off thinking that you've had the perfect session I've been coaching a lot of years. I don't think I've ever coached the perfect session. And I personally don't think that makes me a bad coach. I think that it means that I'm always learning and I'm always trying to develop and move things along. But I think the key point you've spoken about there is actually having a key objective for each session and making sure that them objectives account for everyone within the session. So, for example, there's bits in teaching where they talk about almost some. So by the end of the session, all will get this, most will progress onto this, and some, who be like the high flyers, will have progressed onto this. And I think from a player development point of view, if you're going back to coaching sort of kids and adolescents, I think that's really important, because you're then thinking about your what and trying to adapt that so that every player is moving at the right level for them. And a lot of that touches on with session objectives. I mean, we've not spoke about this series, I don't think, that much, but around sort of Bob Muir's the coach's planning and reflective framework. So how you achieve your learning objectives is massively influenced by the activity structure that you decide and try and implement, the learner engagement, and then the behaviors that you then present as a coach. So if you've not achieved your objectives, it's probably down to maybe one of them things, or they are all actually connected. Because if your activity structure isn't engaging, then the players aren't going to be interested. So you could show the best positive, over the top, enthusiastic behaviors in the world, but if your activity is boring, you're not going to get that learner engagement. And vice versa, you could have a really good activity plan that's really got high engagement, but if you're being a miserable, then that's then also then going to have an impact on the quality of the session. And it can happen, and you can review that in like specific moments. So if there was a particular point where learner engagement did drop off, and you've got that sort of, you can reflect back on, well, actually, maybe it was down to this point because of X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, Oh, yeah, that's surprisingly, I couldn't agree with you more. I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that planning active framework, planning reflective framework. Sorry, I can never get those words out. Was actually probably the biggest thing for me as a young coach, and actually kind of taking that seriously within my planning and then my reflections. Just because it enabled me to be more self-aware and have that autonomy and really focus on my own practice. Because it is, we're always learning, as you say. The game is always evolving, so we always need to evolve as coaches, and we've got to keep ourselves honest and accountable for that. Yeah, definitely.
Is there anything else I think that stood out for you over the course of the last 9 episodes?
Ooh, just the just some dodgy captain bench drops, but yeah, if you can go back and relive some of those are quite questionable.
So that sort of brings me on to this one, Harrison. You weren't aware that I was going to do this, but I thought, well, why not finish the season? You've put a lot of people under pressure over the last 9 episodes. Why not maybe try and do it to you? Now, I'm going to be a little bit kinder. I'm not going to give you the drop option, but what we're going to do is we've had a fair few guests, more than we actually planned out for this season. So rather than having drop, because I thought that's a bit harsh, they've given up the time and come on the podcast. You don't want to drop anyone. So we're going to go. You've got 3 options, and I'm not going to give you. You've obviously got the names. You can pick from all the guests that we've had. All right. Creating your not perfect, a sports club. All right. You've got to decide on your CEO, your coach, and your captain from the guests that we've had on.
CEO, coach, and captain.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
I thought it would be harsh to have the drop in there because like I say, people have given up the time to come on. You don't want to drop anyone.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I agree. I think we're more than we're more than grateful for all the guests that we've had on. Yeah, but no, I think I've got an idea of who I'm doing. I know who my CEO is straight away. That's going to have to be Colin Stevens. I had to go with Colin Stevens as CEO because there's one man that knows how to look after his people and get rid of things that that we need to some things need to go under the carpet. And Colin's very good at things under the carpet. Didn't happen on my watch. Everything's hunky dory. He knows how to people please. Does Colin? So he's gonna have to be the CEO. In terms of my coach, in terms of my coach, I'm gonna have to keep it in house with Lee Beckett and have it as Steve McEwen. First of all, just because of the stories you can tell, I'd be more interested in. Oh, we don't want to do a session, Steve. Tell us more about these crocodiles and eating the teachers. That's just brilliant. And actually, I know that, and through conversations, not just on the podcast, but alongside with Steve, he's constantly engaging in his coaching. Not that the others don't. But he's a good listener. He takes on board what we say, and he's a forever involving. And then my captain. Now this is probably a bit tough. My captain, I'm gonna have to go Joe Kane. Joe Kane as captain. He's a good morale booster. He's fun to have around the dressing room, but when he wants to get stuff done, he gets stuff done. It's the Leicester way. It's the Leicester Tiger way. I mean, as as an Northampton Saints fan, there's a lot of the reasons why I shouldn't be picking Joe Kane anywhere near as a captain. But morale booster, and when the hits the fan, he's gonna be there to support and drive us through. So there you go, CEO Colin, coach Steve McKeown, and then good old El Capitano, Joe Kane.
Well done. There you go. You know how it feels now.
I genuinely didn't know you were going to do that to me.
Yeah.
My poor old heart is racing.
I just wanted to, so you can share the same anxieties and fear that the guests have. Because it was your feature, it was your idea. So I thought,
sweaty palms. You can see Peter's just cruel. That's cruel.
Right, season 1 done. I just want to say, first of all, thank you to all the guests that have come on. It's been great hearing everyone's different stories, and they've kindly given up the time to come on and share their stories. Secondly, the listeners. I thought when me and Harrison first had this idea to start this, that it'd be just my mum and his mum that listened to it. But the fact that we've had a lot of people watching me sat in my bedroom and Harrison in his living room on YouTube and listening on podcasts is unbelievable, and it's great that people wanted to share, engage, and send messages about how they've found the series. Canterbury for agreeing to sponsor a prize and helping us in that way. That was great for sort of an introductory podcast. And Harrison, thanks to all for coming on the journey. When I proposed the idea back in January, you were massively keen to get involved, and I definitely don't think this season would have been, probably even got started without sort of dragging you in to help with it as well. So thank you for that. I think there's been a lot of learning. We're already planning season 2, which promises to be quite exciting. Quite happily leave that claim here right now.
Yes, and that's just my contract negotiations for season 2 as well.
Yeah, we'll discuss that afterwards. Guys, thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed the series. We will be back in September for season 2. We will see you all then. See you soon.
Cheers for listening. Don't forget to join in the discussion at Big Breakdown HQ on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.